Hey PCWorld fans, Adam here with Gordon, and this new thing called Ice Lake just came out, but what I want to know is that should I wait to buy a laptop right now?
If you want to skip everything we're going to talk about for the next few minutes, I would say probably, but not necessarily is the answer. I think there's a lot of goodness there for a lot of people who want it. You probably want to wait if you care about the things we're going to talk about. But if you just want a laptop and to use it and you don't really care, yeah, there's great laptops out today. I wouldn't worry about it.
But I want the best of the best, so...
Yeah, so that is, of course, Intel's 10th gen, stay with me, 10th gen, 10 nanometer, codename Ice Lake Core i7, the one we're going to talk about, 1065G7.
It's a lot of numbers.
Yeah, 1065 G7 is the important thing. That is the one thing we got to look at. And I'm going to say I've been covering hardware for a long time. I've never gone into Intel before the product has launched and run a bunch of tests. This is fairly unprecedented. They basically allowed a handful of hardware reviewers to come in, touch this laptop we're about to show you. We could run any benchmark we wanted. There were no constraints. But it had to be run on this laptop because it was the only way you could get your hands onto a 10th gen.
So who made this laptop?
So no one makes it. If you're looking at this laptop and you think it's ugly, you don't like the bezels, you know, this is just a generic laptop that Intel makes by the thousands. They order them up from someone and then they send them out to software developers so they can start developing their applications, start tuning things. It's called an SDS system, software developer system. It's ugly, who cares? It's not about the laptop, it's about the CPU inside. Inside Core i7 1065G7 in this laptop, and I'm gonna say, yeah, but Gordon, they're cheating. They got a liquid chiller running out into the backyard with, to a semi-truck. No, we actually had them open up one of these things up at the end of the day. We looked at it, and here this picture, you see the inside of this SDS system. That's pretty wimpy looking. That bronze part, copper color, that is the heat pipe in this laptop. And I will say, having looked at a lot of laptops, that is what you would technically call a wimpy ass cooler on there. If you look at the next picture, that is the inside of a Dell XPS 13 9380. It is among the fastest, if not the fastest, Whiskey Lake U laptop. It's got two big ass heat pipes. They swing for the fences with this laptop. And that laptop you just saw, there's no rigging in this in any manner. Most likely, the performance you're gonna see is gonna be as baseline. It's going to be as low as this, definitely probably going to be higher once people tune it. You take this chip, throw it into a Dell, should get better. One more thing, see, this is how thick it is. Obviously not that thick, also not that thin, but it's just simply ugly. Again, it's just a system for developers to use. They're not paying for it, they're getting it for free, so they're not going to put a lot of money into it. A couple thermal images. This is the SDS system after about a 20-minute handbrake encode. For the most part, it's not getting it really warm. In fact, the laptop never got warm at all. And this is the 9380 that Dell swings for the fences, gets warm, but is fast.
Interesting. Yeah, when we're talking about how it performs, where do we start off?
We start off with Cinebench R15. I will say the messaging from Intel is like, oh, handbrake. We know you're going to run handbrake. You can run it. Again, no rules. You could run it, but we hate handbrake. Why do you run handbrake on a laptop? That's the messaging from Intel, but of course, if we had a great big desktop with a lot of cores and they were faster than AMD, they say, oh, why did you run handbrake? Still, I understand what they're saying. Here we have this SDS system against an HP Spectre X360 8th gen Whiskey Lake U, a very good convertible laptop, so a little slower. Generally, tablet convertibles are a little bit slower. And against that Dell traditional clamshell laptop, same Whiskey Lake chip. Basically, one is sort of middle ground of performance are you going to get out of today's 8th gen Whiskey Lake, and the Dell is sort of the top end of what you're going to get out of a Whiskey Lake U. One other thing, that SDS system, we could set it for 15 watt TDP, or we could set it for 25 watt TDP. I ran both where I could, and there's, it's up to the OEM how they want to configure it for the laptops that they build. You can see that performance is okay. People who thought this is going to like knock it out of the ballpark, win everything, it's pretty good because the 25 watt SDS system is running up above that Dell XPS, which again is one of the fastest laptops I've seen with the Whiskey Lake U.
And like you said, the Dell is really good at keeping it cool. So
yeah, so really good. So you have that better cooling in the Dell. So this is actually reasonable performance for 25 watts, but when you're down at 15 watts, it's about as fast as what you're going to get out of that HP. But I imagine if you put the Ice Lake into another laptop similar, it's going to be close. But it doesn't. this doesn't sort of light the world on fire, right? That's
Yeah.
multi-threaded performance.
Yeah.
We're going to look at Cinebench R20 multi-threaded. One difference between Cinebench R15 and R20 is there's AVX 512 and I think AVX 2 loads. Generally, when you throw AVX at Intel chips, they clock down a little bit. Also, it takes a lot longer to run. Cinebench 15, you run multi-core, might take 40 seconds. Cinebench 20 might take 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. That basically is running a CPU harder. It heats up, turbo boost goes down, and you can see actually the Dell, which was slightly slower than the 25 watt SDS system, is now running faster a little bit. The HP actually got worse, the SDS, but let's call it pretty much mostly a tie here. The 15 watt configured, slightly better, which is actually a good showing because the clock speeds on the Ice Lake is still lower than a Whiskey Lake. Generally good showing, but you're looking at this, you're like, nothing to get excited about. Let's look at single threaded performance, R15. Takes a long time. It's pretty much, who cares, right? The Spectre, because it is convertible, a little bit slower, but for the most part, we're not giving anything up. But it's pretty much, if you look at it, single threaded performance, it's pretty much a dead-on tie between, the Ice Lake and Whiskey Lake laptops. Nothing to get excited about. Again, the single-threaded performance in Cinebench, same thing. 25 watt Ice Lake does pretty well, but the Whiskey Lake U and the Dell still actually a little bit slower. But you can see, for the most part, who cares, right? 464 versus 459, nothing to lose sleep over.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people are going to go, oh my God, I don't care now. Let's keep looking. This is Pavre, another sort of very CPU-intensive visualization, ray tracing, CPU-based tool. It's been around since the Amiga. Again, 25 watt Ice Lake, slightly slower than a Dell XPS with that Whiskey Lake U. It's technically a 15 watt TDP, but Dell pushes it into the low 20s most of the time because of their enhanced cooling. And the two 15 watt and the convertibles, definitely slower. But again, people are like, I don't care now, Gordon. Why do I care? I just want to show you these things because you do have to see it. There are some people, they do some things that it's not a big deal between Whiskey Lake U and Ice Lake U for these people.
I mean, for normal tasks, any of these are fine.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, if you went back to, frankly, if you went back to a KB Lake laptop or even back to a Skylake laptop, do you really have to upgrade? No. You're using Chrome and Office for most people? No. Don't even worry about it. This is for people looking at cool new stuff. This is PC Mark 10 overall. Actually gives a slight advantage to Ice Lake over Whiskey Lake U. A lot of that is because PC Mark 10, I do like the workloads they use very much. They're using GIMP, they're using a lot of open source stuff, they're using LibreOffice, a lot of real world applications, but on the open source side. But they also now integrate all their OpenCL stuff into it as well. So it used to be you actually chose whether you want the CPU load or the GPU load. Now they've sort of blended both of them, so you see a lot of a bump for, I think that's where a lot of the PC Mark stuff is coming from. The GPU is the big jump here for Ice Lake. We'll get into that. Next bench, content creation, more GPU stuff, and we see a big lead open up for Ice Lake. In fact, I need to check my Dell number. I got a little wackiness with some of the scores for the XPS, got stuck in a weird state. But overall, Ice Lake winner. That's a very decent uplift too in PC Mark content creation, but of course, a lot of that is because of the GPU. It might also be because of the new instructions, the new cores in there. This is a very normal task. I take Audacity, the latest version 2.32. I take a 700 meg WAV file, full nerd recording, about an hour and 10 minutes.
Yep.
Open that WAV up, I export it to MP3 using just the standard presets, fast, I think joint stereo encoding. One that encodes the fastest wins. The winner, mostly a tie, is Ice Lake here. And actually, I was quite surprised at this. I'll have to look into what they're doing in the latest version of Audacity. But this is sort of those things where you see a nice big advantage for Ice Lake because it might have the media coding, it might have AVX. And I'm not really sure, but in the latest version of Audacity, they are using LAME. They've encoded the LAME encoder, which I think uses AVX or... Who knows? I'm not really sure what they changed. I'll have to go back and look at the changelogs. But Doesn't matter. You're looking at a 62-second export versus 80 or 69. One's a little bit faster, so that's a very decent uplift, especially over that HP. And then the Dell with those very high clocks is not that far behind, but still loses to Ice Lake. Remember, this is a single-threaded load, and the clocks on the Whiskey Lake units are probably 4.5, 4.3 versus 4.1 to 4. So even though these Whiskey Lake parts are running at a higher clock, that's a really good showing for Ice Lake there. But here is some of the goodness. Now, this is Handbrake. I take Handbrake, the latest version. It was actually a nightly. I used it from July 29th, I believe. I took a 4K video file, Tears of Steel, and then I used that and I exported it UHD 4K, 60 frames a second, and I used QuickSync encoding. So for Ice Lake, it has faster encoding performance, H.265, HEVC, and we are seeing that show up right here. That's just a whooping, right? I mean, that, even the 15 watt part at 691 seconds versus 784 of that Dell, which is no slouch. That Dell is no slouch. That is a big difference.
Yeah.
But you crank up the wattage on the Ice Lake part, and I saw a 508 second. I mean, that is just all over those old Whiskey Lake parts, and it's because of the improved media encoding engine in Ice Lake.
That's great.
So if you're one of those quick sync snobs, we know who you are. You bought your Core i9 instead of Verizon because you are a quick sync snob. Then Ice Lake cores, these new media encoding cores, look very, very beefy.
Nice. Okay.
Right? Next one is Synergy. CineScore 10.4. This is basically throwing a bunch of encoding benchmarks. It's all in RAM, and they encode it, and then they spit out a score. It tests, standard def, high def, ultra high def, and 8K performance. This is just simply the composite score of everything. Higher is better. Pretty good, right? Again, I'm going to guess that is probably the encoding engine in Ice Lake, although I'm surprised that they would have the latest SDK. I'm not sure they do. It could just simply be because the new IGP and these Ice Lake cores they're awesome compared to the other ones, and we see the 25 watt Ice Lake score just destroy everything. Down at 15 watts though, still dead even, but you crank up the wattage, and that's a very decent performance. This is Geekbench. I have had an off and on relationship with Geekbench over the years. 4.4 is pretty good. I like it. If you stay within the OS and you stay within the test. Overall, I think it's a lot of different tests. It just tends maybe 15 or 18 different things. This is the overall score. I know you want to see this. I'm going to cut all the other chaff out of here. This is the 15 watt Ice Lake versus the quote unquote 15 watt Dell. It's really more of a 20 watt. And the score in Geekbench overall is 18,000 versus 15.5, 18.7 versus 15.5.
It's better.
Win for Ice Lake. This is a single core run in Geekbench. Again, overall composite score. Win for Ice Lake, lose for Whiskey Lake U. Not a huge amount, but let's dive into some of the things where a lot of the advantage, the reasons why those scores are getting buffed in Geekbench. There's encryption improvement in Ice Lake, and we see it in Geekbench. Single threaded, so single core. AES performance, and you're looking at 7,600 versus 4,800.
That's a big jump.
Right? That's a huge jump. They did say they improved encryption in this. Obviously, Geekbench is taking advantage of it, and we are seeing a sizable increase in performance in that one test. Single-threaded, single-core. And again, I'm showing some of the key highlights. There's some things like, wow, this thing is like smoking. Ice Lake is smoking. There's some things like, it's like the same as a Whiskey Lake. So. It doesn't look like you're losing ground because of the clocks, but generally these things you hit, like here, let's look at SFFT. It's an FFT, fast Fourier, I can never pronounce it, it's French, fast Fourier transform test. There's AVX 512, there's AVX 2 in this. Hey, Ice Lake has AVX 512, first consumer chip with AVX 512, first mobile chip with 512. And again, we see, look at this, Ice Lake U is battering that Whiskey Lake U chip. Even the fastest one we've seen in that Dell, huge differences because there's AVX 512. Geekbench test uses that, leverages it, and you see that big jump. So if you're using AVX 512 workloads, you want Ice Lake, right?
Nice.
This is the memory test within Geekbench. I just didn't have time to run Ada or Sandra, but Geekbench works. This is gigabytes per second. Remember, one of the big changes from Ice Lake to Whiskey Lake U is LPDDR3 in Whiskey Lake U and all previous chips. LPDDR4X in Ice Lake, right? So we basically moved to LPDDR4. LPDDR4X, a big difference is power savings, because we have had DDR in laptops, but you gave up power because it wasn't LPDDR4. LPDDR4 promise is fantastic standby time. It just uses no power practically. It uses like 1/10 of the power of DDR when the laptop lid is shut.
Wow.
So that's why you would probably want LPDDR4X over LPDDR3. And the other thing, of course, is crap load more memory bandwidth. LPDDR4X 3733, and I think in the Dell it is LPDDR3 2667, I'm guessing. So it's just more memory bandwidth. You see it here in Geekbench, 31.5 gigabytes per second versus 23.5 gigabytes per second. And I'm gonna imagine probably slightly better in power and definitely way better standby time than you're gonna get out of a Whiskey Lake U laptop with DDR4. But here's the crazy thing. I think the real magic in Ice Lake is the new Gen 11 graphics core. I know I've made a living out of making fun of Intel integrated graphics, but that door is closing as I can tell. First test we're gonna see is 3D Mark Skydiver. It's basically a fairly light level game, but actually something it's representative of the workloads you might play on a thin and light laptop, right?
Okay.
So what we're comparing that to is the Spectre and the Dell, essentially identical HD 620 graphics, whatever, 620, 630, it doesn't really ever get any better. And because what you can also sort of see in laptops in this form factor are GeForce MX150 graphics. There are two MX150 cards. They're the same cards. One is set for 10 watts, one is set for 10 watts, the 1D12, and the hotter one, the original MX150, runs up to 25 watts.
Wow.
You can see on top, Ice Lake is twice as fast as Whiskey Lake U. 4700, 4300 versus 9400 and 9000. Every single test practically I ran, it's just about twice as fast as previous Intel graphics.
Wow.
Big jump. It gets pretty damn close to NVIDIA's 25 watt MX150. And in Skydiver, in particular, we're looking at slightly faster, let's call it a tie, with an MX150 10 watt version.
Wow.
So the lower watt version is really no faster than Gen 11 graphics.
That's crazy.
In the benchmarks. So we're gonna go to the next one. This is Time Spy. Definitely more strenuous, is a DirectX 12 benchmark. Again, same thing. We're looking at lapping those previous HD parts. I mean, the graphics are really like, wow, here. Okay, one more 3D Mark test. This is really valuable for a couple things. This is a DirectX 12, fairly lightweight DirectX 12 benchmark that FutureMark released because they wanted to also run on Qualcomm Snapdragon.
Interesting.
Yes, very interesting. So we actually have a score that Mark Hochman retrieved at Computex. He saw them run 3D Mark Night Raider right around the time it came out on a press preview Qualcomm Snapdragon 8CX. The reason why Qualcomm was like, yeah, Snapdragon was, the score in Night Raid was 6200 versus, look, top end i7 Whiskey Lake units were down at 5400 versus 6200 in Snapdragon.
That was better.
And you look at that like, whoa, this is very important for Intel because not only are they trying to fight AMD, don't have an AMD score, but they're also worried about Qualcomm. They got Qualcomm on the right, they got AMD on the left, they got NVIDIA in front of them. So, but Gen 11 graphics in Ice Lake, I mean, damn, right?
Blows it away.
9900, hey, Intel could say, hey, 8CX, why don't you like come up and get in there? Yeah, destroys the performance of that Snapdragon. Honestly, Intel probably doesn't care about MX150 being, a little bit faster. Discrete graphics still faster, but not that much, I gotta say.
Yeah.
You would hope it'd be a little faster, but they're probably like, hey, Snapdragon, what do the kids say today? We're clapping back at you, Qualcomm, with this score. 6200 versus our 9900 when we're running in our low TDP 15 watt, 15 watt, not necessarily low TDP. But actually, sorry, there is one more synthetic I do want to show off. I didn't get a chance to run it on the MX150 parts, but I did run it on the two existing parts. This is 3D Mark's new variable rate shader performance benchmark. VRS, variable rate shading, basically. When a developer is rendering out a screen, there's sort of some things you have to pay attention to, like, hey, I want this to look really good. Well, do I really need to render the entire screen at the same quality level? it's sort of like what you're getting in VR, right? So let's only render the parts you care about. You don't care about a box off in the shadows, but the way a lot of it does is they are just as computationally intense, and it's off in the shadows, and you're going to walk by it, and you don't care about it. So they can sort of lighten that up. The new VRS benchmark in 3D Mark measures the performance of VRS when it's enabled and when it's off. This is the overall score. There's also a mode where you could say, stop the frame. I have VRS off. Give me a screen cap. Turn on VRS. Give me a screen cap. So now you can look at it side by side and say, yeah, I don't give a damn that this barrel that's 100 meters off in the distance is slightly fuzzier. But as you can see, this is kicking butt over those UHD parts, because 67, 64 frames a second versus 20, 28, 27, that's win all day. And when you enable VRS, Intel sort of implying we can get you potentially a lot more performance. You go from 67 to 94 and 64 to 84 frames per second. Gen 11 graphics, Ice Lake, all win. And of course you go, oh, that's just synthetics. Let's run a couple games. Okay, ran a couple games. This is Counter-Strike Global Operations, 720p. I'm running 720p. I did run 1080p. I just don't recommend it. I know people say 1080p. To me, I'd rather run 720p at 60 frames a second than 1080p at 30 frames a second. That's my philosophy.
On a laptop.
On a laptop, especially on a 2.5 pound laptop. I think that is a perfectly fine compromise. So one thing, I did not have scores for this in the 15 watt setting, unfortunately. I ran out of time to test it, but I have it for 25 watt. And again, Counter-Strike Go, there is an FPS workshop mod you can run this. It's a very harsh benchmark, I will say. I know you look at some of these frame rates going, that's pretty low. It's like, well, it's about 80 to 90 in a lot of the scenes. And then there's a smoke goes off or a frag goes off. 80 to 90, almost double that in normal gameplay. Maybe 80 to 90 frames a second until somebody throws a frag. But this is probably realistic because you don't want to play a game, have somebody throw a frag, drop to 20 frames a second, and then get killed. But UHD, again, 37, 41, not great. 25 watt Ice Lake U, 64 frames a second. And this is a good example of why some synthetic benchmarks may not necessarily show you everything, because as you can see, both of the Huawei MateBooks with their MX150s do better because of the discrete graphics. Even the MX150 with 10 watts is a decent amount faster. It's got its own memory. There's probably different things going on. But overall, still not bad. I say that is really good for integrated graphics. Next game, World of Tanks. Medium preset. I was able to run this at 25 watts and 15 watts. As you can see, current integrated graphics, the joke that it is, and we are looking at very decent performance out of these Ice Lake chips, almost twice as fast as what you're getting out of current UHD. That's a win. The MateBook with the 25 watt GPU is still definitely cranking very decent. I unfortunately don't have the slide here in front of me for the 10 watt version, but going off my memory, it's about 9,000 or about 8,000. It's basically almost the same score as that 25 watt Ice Lake. That is very impressive, right?
Very.
And yes, you can run Crysis. I know everybody goes, can't run Crysis, but for you, person who's gonna go in and comment, I ran Crysis. And I ran Crysis 2007 because when people talk about can it run Crysis,
the original Crysis.
This is what they're talking about, the original Crysis from 2007. And it's again, Intel likes to say, hey, we can run it on original UHD graphics. Yeah, you can run it like butt at 27 frames a second. Gen 11 graphics, 47 frames a second at 10 by 7. I had to run an old school resolution because that's the only way you're going to run it. That's a 4:3 1024 by 768 for people who were born on this side of the decade. That's what that means. Set to very high, 47 frames a second. That's pretty good because I'm pretty sure that is better than what you're getting out of a GeForce 8800 GT back then. So that's pretty good for integrated graphics.
That's hilarious.
The 25 watt MX150, I didn't get a chance to run Crysis. On the 10 watt part, I'm going to guess it's going to be a lot closer to that Gen 11 graphics, but it runs Crysis, folks.
Yeah, hey, it does it.
It runs Crysis.
All right, so what's the major takeaway? Once again, should people wait to buy a laptop for Ice Lake to come out?
Okay, so I think it very much depends on what you do. If you use Chrome, you use Office, you watch Netflix videos, if you're seeing a great deal on an XPS 13 or a Spectre X3060 13 or a Lenovo or whatever you want, I say go for it. Because honestly, it's about what you do, not about what you doing the benchmarks. If that's all I'm doing, go for those great deals, because Whiskey Lake U is an awesome CPU. Those are awesome laptops, and if you're going to see a big savings of them now, because before these new laptops come out, go for it. I don't think you'll feel bad.
Okay.
But if you use QuickSync, if you do a lot of media encoding, if you use AVX 512, and there are maybe some engineering apps, some specialized apps you're using, possibly we might even see, if you're doing encryption, I'd probably want Ice Lake over a Whiskey Lake U laptop, right? Because it's just like those things are seeing a definite bump. 15, 20% memory bandwidth stuff is just like, it's really, if you really care about the performance on your thin and light laptop, I know most people don't, but there are some people who do, then yes, I would wait for it. And of course, the big story is Gen 11 graphics. If you want better graphics in your thin and light, you're gonna play games. You think your kids might wanna play games. It's gonna be way better on these Ice Lake laptops. And I'm gonna say, yeah, you're gonna wait for it.
Okay.
So if you want the graphics performance, definitely worth waiting for.
Okay.
Definitely worth getting an Ice Lake over.
So I would say the even bigger question is, when does it come out?
I don't know exactly. Obviously, the news broke this morning. The announcement hit today. We saw Dell. If you go back to Computex, there was a Dell introduced at Computex. HP has come out with a couple laptops. I'm going to say within a month. I think August is probably when you're going to see them.
Okay.
Right.
So
very, very soon now.
Yeah. If
It's August. Actually, it's August today. I forgot.
Oh, yeah.
We're recording this before August. You're basically going to start seeing these laptops finally start to come out. So, shop based on those things for price, and yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, you heard it here first, and obviously when the actual laptops that get this part come in, we're going to do some testing. Be sure to subscribe, come back. Gordon does a great job of doing all that testing, so thank you so much.
Yeah, it's
and
fun.
stay tuned for more laptop testing on PCWorld and PCWorld.com.